Next, let's invite our next important keynote speaker. Let me make an introduction, the Venerable Khenpo Sodargye Rinpoche. Today, we're very honored that the Science and Happiness Symposium has been able to invite the Venerable Khenpo Sodargye Rinpoche from Larung Gar 5 Sciences Buddhist Academy. Rinpoche today will compassionately teach on practice and mental health. Next, please welcome Khenpo Rinpoche.
I'm very honored and happy to participate in this symposium today. It's mainly about science and happiness. Personally speaking, today I also haven't prepared a PowerPoint, nor have I prepared a speech manuscript. But it's not that I don't value this conference, nor that I don't value this academic thought, but because recently I've indeed been very busy, so I can only rely on my own views and thoughts, freely sharing with all the teachers, guests, and students present here. In some places that are unreasonable or places that conflict with your thoughts, I hope later during the interactive period, if there's opportunity, we can discuss, debate. Both are fine. Just now, many professors and experts presented on the topic of science and happiness from different dimensions and different angles. I think this is very necessary. We can say that today, in the 21st century, it should be said to be unprecedented. An era of tremendous leaps and bounds in scientific development and progress. And today we can also say is an era when people desperately, frantically pursue happiness. At this time, people who truly obtain a sense of happiness, according to some data, indeed perhaps it's not very ideal. On the surface, we're now in an information age. Since the Industrial Revolution, in any era, in terms of material development, none has peaked like this era. But the happiness, joy, and satisfaction people obtain in their hearts, perhaps in this current era, it's rather confused. This morning I had a brief dialogue with Professor Zhu Qingxi, the former president of the University of Science and Technology. The two of us had a simple conversation. He was also saying at that time he's very worried about the current young generation or student generation, because recently there's a teacher from Peking University who said that now over 30% of Peking University students are already in a state of feeling lost or out of control. They don't know how to work, don't know how to study. They're in such a state. If Peking University is like this, then everyone knows, nationally speaking, Peking University is the best in learning, the top, such a place where the best of the best gather, where talent converges. If they have such a sense of confusion and panic, then what can we say about our beautiful ideals for the future, truly realizing dreams in the future? At that time, we also discussed mental health, including what we're rather worried about now, many teachers guiding students and many doctors treating patients, many leaders regarding their enterprises or their subordinates. In the process of providing guidance, there are many, many problems. Social problems, mental problems, and family problems are continuously emerging and appearing. So at this time, how do we search for this sense of happiness? Indeed, just now, many experts, from art, from science, from different literature, etc., from various levels analyzed happiness. This, I think, is very necessary. Now, many people desperately, we pursue happiness, but where exactly is happiness? Especially for young people, it's important to understand this principle. This is very important for us currently. Of course, what I report to everyone today may not necessarily be on the same dimension as what some experts today or some experts tomorrow describe. Just now, the teacher who presented from an artistic perspective directly said there are some different viewpoints between science and their art. They spoke frankly. Perhaps I also, at a certain level, speaking from religion or from the level of Buddhist science, perhaps there are also some differences from the viewpoints some people analyze. Why do I say this? Because I've discovered today or tomorrow many science workers, when searching for happiness, mostly focus on the brain, on the human body, on sensory organs, on material life, or on love, or on external things. And that search for things is rather common. When analyzing, they also analyze and interpret from this level. But I, perhaps more, so-called happiness, actually it's a subjective feeling of the mind. On this point, there's not much difference from much of psychological science. But if we search more deeply, then so-called happiness should be sought from within the heart. Moreover, when finally obtained, it should be inner satisfaction. This is the most lasting, the most eternal. Otherwise, if we rely on some external thing for support, indeed, temporarily, it may seem perhaps happy. When you make a fortune, when you get married, when you have children, when you get promoted, or when you possess what you beautifully pursue, that instant, that moment, perhaps there's a kind of brief sense of happiness. But this sense of happiness will disappear, will shatter in a very short time. Therefore, from different Buddhist levels, we should understand what so-called happiness really is. For us humans in this world, what percentage does happiness actually occupy? Seeking from this level is very necessary. Many people may very much aspire to pursue happiness, especially young people, because some people who are a bit older in age basically should be relatively clear. Life's experience is already clear. Just now some said, I'm in my 40s, 50s, it seems there's already no hope. But I don't think so, because Trump became president at age 70. He started America's, whether the entire country or worldwide. If he has such great confidence, I think 50 or 60 is still a very young person. Although Confucius previously said, at 30 I stood firm, at 40 I had no doubts, at 50 I knew the mandate of heaven, especially when reaching 50. Perhaps one knows the laws of life, including some cause and effect, dependent origination, and so on. These principles perhaps become more and more mature, more and more clear. Therefore, today, it's very necessary for us to deeply contemplate this happiness that humanity currently pursues. But happiness, many people can't attain it. The reason for not attaining it was also just mentioned. Many students commit suicide. I've also seen much information in this regard, including now officially released data, publicly released by the Public Security Bureau, is also relatively similar to what some experts just said. Every year now, 287,000 people commit suicide, but among them, 150,000 are students. Among these 150,000, 70,000 to 80,000 die due to study pressure and mental unhealthiness. Moreover, China, we can say, relative to the whole world, its population accounts for 1/5 of the world's, but its suicide rate accounts for 2/5. That is to say, from the suicide rate level, globally speaking, although America and the UK suicide rates are now increasingly high, we all know, logically speaking, the UK, America, and countries like Japan, from the GDP level, happiness index should be relatively high. But on the contrary, when their science becomes more and more advanced, their economies more and more abundant, conversely, their happiness index decreases more and more. In such circumstances, their suicide rates are also continuously rising. But compared with our annual suicide rate here, it's rather frightening. Most are mainly led to this by mental problems, because if we don't, from childhood, resolve mental problems well, don't understand them well, it's very possible that indeed oneself can't think it through, including some adults. It's also very possible when pressure is really too much, really can't think it through, wanting to take sleeping pills or jump from a building to commit suicide. It's very possible. But regarding these problems, I think Buddhism should sometimes provide a very good convenience, letting you contemplate well. There's a story in Buddhism that I think can draw everyone's attention. It's about an especially foolish person story. How does it go? There was a herder who had 250 cattle. Every day, he protected these 250 cattle like his own life, letting them graze, drink water, constantly on very spacious grasslands, letting them live freely. He loved them very much, but once, unfortunately, a wild beast killed one of his cattle. After that, this herder's heart was especially unhappy. He felt, my 250 cattle are now imperfect, incomplete. From now on, there's no meaning. Later, he drove the remaining 249 cattle to a cliff and destroyed them, making all of them jump from the cliff to their deaths, 249. Looking at this story, this person is especially foolish. Logically speaking, he only lost one cow. He still had over 200 other cattle. This person should have everything he needs. It shouldn't be like this. But this person is indeed very foolish. However, sometimes we also reflect on problems. Many college students who commit suicide, isn't it because they can't accept the totality of life? If they could accept the totality of life, they can only accept one aspect. Just now, some professors mentioned some students are for 9,000 yen, some students are for 6,000 yen. Is it worth it? It's not worth it. Actually, if this time 6,000 yen is lost, actually it's not necessarily so. Life still has hope. Now, especially the majority, many die from broken hearts. I often think this way. Whether losing love, losing work, or losing school, in life there are many, many losses. But just because we lose this, is it really gone? Not necessarily. Previously, a classmate told me, I've now had a broken heart. I feel there's no need to live in this world. I said, why? Because I especially love him. If he doesn't want me, I feel there's no need. I said at that time, in the world there are very many handsome men. You can find others. Is it that you hope you really can't find even one? She said, perhaps I can find, but I can't find someone like him. I said, is he that good looking? I heard he's rather ugly. She said, perhaps I can find, but I seem to have no confidence. I don't like all men. I said, if you don't like all men, you don't need to die, right? Rather than dying, wouldn't it be better to survive using other methods? Actually, sometimes if we slightly expand our thinking, for example, committing suicide due to emotional reasons, we feel just like this person just now because one cow was lost, so everything else was lost. The same principle. In our lives, in our work, some things we can't think through. When we can't think them through, indeed it's we ourselves who choose this, including what was just mentioned, whether getting depression or getting autism recently in Nanjing, Suzhou, and also Beijing and Harbin, etc. When I went many places, many parents said, my child is now in first year of middle school, first year of high school, third year of middle school, but they themselves say, Mom, I may have a psychological problem. Can you find me a psychologist? Some say the child themselves proposed, can you take me to the hospital for observation? I seem to feel something's not right with my mind. So now students themselves say, they themselves feel they have some psychological problems. Such phenomena exist in many places. This, in the past, indeed, I've also been in contact with people in cities. It should be over 30 years now. In over 30 years, there were almost none like this. But now, among the student population, among the teacher population, including among some doctors' populations, there's also excessive mental pressure and excessive tension, ultimately leading to oneself having certain principles of not being able to think through things. So, at this time, it's very necessary to have some practice, including going to some pure temples to take a look. What some students just said, I think, is very good. Now, people in big cities, in terms of material wealth, perhaps relatively good, but spiritually rather empty, without much faith. In our goals, besides money and love, there's no happiness. There's no place to pin happiness on. All our hopes rely on some material things. At this time, it's very possible some unpleasant things will appear in our lives. Therefore, on this fundamental level, it's perhaps necessary for us to contemplate, necessary to explore. So when exploring, there are two methods. One method, I suggest, when our lives are very joyful or happy, we can't be complacent thinking, I'm happy now, it'll always be like this forever. We can't think like this, whether it's your status or your wealth or your entire dignified appearance or your entire widespread reputation. That is, in all aspects, people have some relatively peak, relatively high tide times. But at this time, it's very possible there's also some tendency to decline. The law of the world is, when you've gone to the highest point, you must descend. When you've descended to the lowest, you must ascend again. So when we reach the lowest valley, we also can't be dejected or discouraged because of this, disappointed or despairing. There's still hope to rise. That is to say, when you're at the very bottom, that's now when you start to rise. I saw on some graphs just now, some perhaps temporarily go up. Including just now, I saw when divorcing, it seemed at the beginning a bit low, then gradually went up. Many modern people may not quite understand this, but actually, perhaps they figured it out. Finally, indeed, there's such a thing. Just now I saw this, quite interesting. When getting married, it went up, but finally very quickly. Within 3 years, it dropped down. Although I haven't experienced such happiness actually, if I haven't experienced it, it's also acceptable. If it falls down that quickly, I'm also not especially eager for it. In such circumstances, human happiness, to a certain extent, indeed has its time limit. Moreover, according to Buddhism's viewpoint, beside each happiness, actually there's also suffering waiting. If there's happiness, there's also suffering. I don't know if you've heard, Viva, there's a very famous Buddhist master called Aryadeva, very famous in India. He has a particularly famous treatise called The 400 Verses. In the 400 verses, it says, if you delight in gathering, why not delight in parting? Gathering and parting aren't both present at the same time. This phrase, I don't have a PowerPoint, so you may not be able to remember. What does it mean? If you especially like people, for example, appointments, gatherings, reunions, such gatherings of friends and family, if you especially like gathering, why don't you like parting? Because after you gather, there will definitely be parting. For example, we are born, there must be death. Living, there must be times of extinction. So it's a law. If you especially like gathering, why don't you like parting? Because parting and gathering, it's natural law. Having life, there must be death. Having height, there must be falling. Perhaps in the world, it's also often said, the great trends of the world, What has long been together must divide. What has long been divided must unite. From Romance of the Three Kingdoms, I believe. So, since you have union, there will definitely be separation. If there's separation, when certain causes and conditions are complete, there will still be union. In the world, it's also often said, 10 years on the east of the river, 10 years on the west. Including feng shui and many situations, now its feng shui is in the east or in the west. Feng shui rotates in turns, this time, that time. Or as it says, misfortune, this is where fortune leans. Fortune, this is where misfortune hides. From Taoism, Confucianism, many classics discuss including misfortune and fortune interdepend. In misfortune there's fortune, in fortune there's misfortune. This, generally speaking, has many laws here. Human life has suffering, has happiness, but what's our habitual pursuit? We like peace and safety, health and wellness, everything complete without defect, perfectly satisfactory. We don't want adversity, don't want disasters to appear, don't want suffering and death to appear, but there's no way. Human life is composed of such factors. Just like having winter, there must be summer. Having spring, there must be autumn. Having daytime, having nighttime. Having this time, also having that time, having birth, having death. So, in a certain sense, many people haven't opened our hearts. If we open our hearts, when we're happy, we'll also experience happiness. For example, when you gather with very good friends, you'll be happy, but they will die. Once they leave, why do you suffer? Because this inevitable law has already manifested. But we can only accept one side, can't accept the other side. This is a very rare value system for humanity. On this point, at the Buddhist level, there's a particularly detailed explanation. The commentary on the 400 verses I just mentioned, a famous Indian master called Chandrakirti. In Chandrakirti's commentary, in his teachings, he specifically quotes a very wonderful story. How does this story go? On the surface, it seems like a mythological story, but actually, if you deeply contemplate this principle, there's very extended meaning. How did he tell it then? He said there was a person, one day someone came knocking at his door. When he looked, a beautiful woman had come, especially dignified in appearance, very good. She said, I've come to your house as a guest. I'm called the goddess of fortune. I'm called the divine lady. I bring to each person's home a kind of joy, happiness, blessings. Very happy. This family was especially delighted. Come, 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 please enter. At this time, she said, my younger sister is also coming together. As a result, her younger sister was hiding outside the door. When they looked, her appearance was especially ugly, looking especially unattractive. Then they said, who is she? She said, she's my younger sister. She's called the goddess of misfortune. This master said, I only accept you entering. That ugly woman shouldn't come. She said, and that's impossible. Wherever the two of us go, we go together. If we don't come, neither of us comes. If we come, the two of us come together. This means when we have happiness, something unhappy in our lives is perhaps hiding. Perhaps now, as we live happy lives, we're continuously planting a kind of seed. What are we planting? Our happy life is perhaps preparing for unhappiness. For example, you appear to be someone with certain prestige, certain career, certain wealth. Now, some enterprises are doing very well. Some people's status is also very good. But if you don't contemplate well, perhaps one of your behaviors will ultimately lead to the latter half of your life, perhaps living unhappily. Perhaps these behaviors of yours in this life, even in your next life, become especially unhappy factors of suffering. This is very, very hard to say. Therefore, sometimes I think it's very necessary for us regarding human life, from philosophy, from religion, to conduct deep analysis. In the process of your analysis, perhaps first understand theoretically, how is this principle grasped? Then, after understanding, it's necessary in actual action to practice, to contemplate. So-called practice doesn't necessarily mean meditation, constantly contemplating in Chan. Of course, this is also a method. This is also a kind of stress relief that's now very popular, a lifestyle tool for leisure, very good. But more importantly, perhaps it's life's impermanence, our impermanent life, life of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Regarding the entire principles of suffering, its origin, cessation, and the path, perhaps very necessary. Some people interested in this area, you should also contemplate. At such times, it's impossible for us to mentally produce a state where every day is especially painful. I think it's absolutely impossible. Some people indeed, all day long in a state of practice or performing altruistic actions. won't have what's now called including autism, suicidal mind. Such becomes less and less, but we're in a state of selfishness, in a state of tension, or in a state of competing and comparing with others. In such a state, we can never obtain true satisfaction. At this time, perhaps at a certain time, our spirit will have problems. Once the spirit has problems, then there's no way to speak of physical health. Therefore, in these aspects, I think our Buddhist culture or Buddhist science perhaps very necessarily has exploratory value. Because at this time, our so-called happiness, actually, I also can, in my physical body, or whether my money is abundant or not, the level of status or such principles. But from Buddhism's viewpoint, the sense of happiness that our current wealth, including wealth, brings you. From the Buddhist level, it's a temporary happiness produced by very small merit. Moreover, it fundamentally won't become the greatest happiness. Why? Buddhism has always, you should know, the happiness brought by wealth, actually it's unstable. It won't last very long. Moreover, in a very short time, when the novelty, when the satisfaction disappears, another desire is produced. When your desire arrives, you're unhappy. Now, most people's values, most people's sense of happiness, theoretically speaking, there are all kinds, but actually everyone thinks perhaps the more and more money, the happier they should be. But when you truly have more money, perhaps you're not necessarily happy. Now, unhappy people, some commit suicide for 1,000 yuan, some for tens of thousands of yuan, some for hundreds of millions, tens of millions, millions, even hundreds of billions. Now, there are so many wealthy people in the world. When watching the news every day, I sometimes often think, if pursuing happiness through external material things, indeed it's very, very difficult. Only searching in the heart, only when searching in the heart. Of course, when you possess wealth, perhaps you also won't be especially arrogant, because all wealth is actually just like flowing water. Today you're the master of wealth, but when you're alive, perhaps after a period of time, it's not your wealth. It will flow into other people's hands. Perhaps after you die, look at many houses now. They've changed how many masters? Now look at the happiness brought by RMB checks. Actually, it's unstable. We can't think, I now have 200,000, I'm forever the master of this 200,000. Not necessarily. After a period, because a special situation appears, I give all 200,000 to others, but I'm still not enough. I still need to borrow money from others. So we can't think this 200,000, forever I'm its master. We can't think like this. In such circumstances, if we seek true inner happiness from external material things, in a certain sense, there are certain difficulties. Therefore, I suggest, when necessary, from your academic level, or yourself, from the level of faith and practice, you should seek inner happiness. When your heart is happy, I think even as you get older and older, perhaps your happiness won't decrease at all. Some professors just said, I'm 50 now, I'm 60 now. I thought at that time, as I get older and older, perhaps I get happier and happier. Why? Perhaps we don't have very high realization, but no matter what, regarding all worldly life, although we live very plainly and simply, but in such plainness and simplicity, in such simplicity and genuineness, there's also a kind of happiness not easily changed. This happiness cannot be replaced by anything else. Therefore, in actual action, perhaps we'll have some practice. Such practice, according to Mahayana Buddhism, I suggest everyone usually in life cultivate a kind of self-other exchange meditation. Self-other exchange meditation for individuals, my own experience and understanding. Indeed, it's very extraordinary. How extraordinary? Usually in daily life, we perhaps very much want others' wealth to be ours. But if I turn it around, change a way of thinking, I hope others obtain my happiness. Originally, many of us wanted to obtain happiness through jealousy, competitiveness. But this is very difficult. Therefore, I give my inner happiness, my well-being to others. I hope others are happy, others are prosperous, others have higher power, others have more wisdom and resources, etc. In the heart, there's a kind of spirit of completely letting go of self, selflessly dedicated to others. Naturally, the mind is like you've already been released from prison. A very subtle happiness and sense of well-being will naturally appear. This is perhaps very important in today's era. Of course, from the academic world, perhaps this still awaits research, because some statements in academia and the statements from the practice world have certain distance and difference. So at the academic level, I also hope to research Mahayana Buddhism's altruistic thought and its views. If you research from an academic level and test people's brains, test people's mental states, at this time, you'll also be able to see. Why now in the world are there many Tibetan Buddhist or other sect practitioners whose inner happiness and happiness index is increasingly higher This also indicates there's a kind of power. This power can be seen through testing. Just now in our tests, I saw your center here also goes to Tibetan areas to test many, including some monastics, some Tibetan people, their brains and their mental states. Understanding human happiness, this is very necessary because like Western countries, in various schools long ago in this area, there's been specific data and specific scientific experiments to prove. Of course, we perhaps have relatively little, but I also hope many of you science workers in future days should invest in some specific projects. When investing, I think in some places we may not necessarily be able to fully verify. Why? Because testing inner happiness through some instruments to understand indeed has certain difficulties, including some transcendent great bliss or some wisdom and realization. For any current instrument to know their realization and their level, there are certain difficulties, but in a certain sense we can study negative emotional fluctuations at the practitioner level. How much? Non-practitioners or those living in big cities with especially fast pace, high density, high tension, in states of high speed development, people's negative emotions and positive emotions. Just now I saw some of your displays are very good. Actually, in our lives, perhaps except for individual practitioners, many have relatively more negative emotions, including fear, anxiety, worry, and many tensions or sense of loss, etc. While positive, wisdom, compassion, altruism or joy, satisfaction, happiness, such, for some people, has certain difficulties. But our life, with practice, with constantly relaxing as primary, in this way, no matter what, life must be lived. Perhaps a tense lifetime must be lived, or perhaps a relatively relaxed lifetime. Each person's merit and each person's situation is different. Some people very much want to make money, but their whole life they're paupers. There's no way they don't have this merit. So no matter how much you worry, no matter how much you want to compete, it's useless. Some people, when your merit manifests, perhaps wealth rolls in, naturally arrives. But if you're not careful, also very quickly it will be lost. Some people, in the process of speculating in stocks, are happy for a period, then invest all their capital. After 2 days, all is lost, and suffering begins again. Saying, just wait, there's also such situations. So many emotions in our lives are also rising and falling. Life can also be said to be floating up and sinking down, or having great rises and falls. Everyone has this. But when there's such phenomena, I hope everyone will be open, will have an inclusive mentality. In our lives, actually, everything can be accommodated. I think many losses can be accommodated. Now, according to Western thinking, I'm writing a book. Whatever loss, it's all acceptable. This is the main theme. Recently, I went to some Western countries. Many in Western countries are especially worried their family members are lost, worried about losing their jobs, worried their youth is immediately fading. I'm getting old. Many people are especially worried. Western people's skin, generally when they reach 40 or 50, it's full of wrinkles. You've also seen Hillary, although her makeup is quite good, but in other photos, it's still not okay. She's nearly 70, we understand. But generally speaking, their kind of skin, so many people worry about getting old, worry perhaps others won't like them, worry at a certain time they won't have money to spend, worry they can't give birth to children. There are so many such worries. But these worries, in a certain sense, when we face them relaxedly, happily, work efficiency will be different from before. Therefore, it's very necessary for us to use some wisdom to face our own lives. When using wisdom to face life, our spirit will definitely be healthy. Having a healthy body, having a healthy mentality, I think in this world, there's nothing remarkable. We have a complete life. My only thought now, when we accept life, we must accept all. Don't singularly accept only a part. If my hope is entirely to accept only a part, or if hope is placed on one part, then indeed it's a bit, perhaps now it's due to some movies and TV, right? My hope, my entire life, for example, as a parent, all my hope is on the baby. Once the baby dies, you start having mental collapse. Then there's nothing, because all your hope was this is now gone. But there's also no need. They're part of your hope. If all your hope is on your lover, that also won't work. In life, besides lovers, there's still more. In life, besides your money, there are other goals. So I've always believed many people should accept the totality of life. In this process, we should accept with a joyful and open mentality. In this way, perhaps it will be very meaningful. All right, I'll say this much.